All right. Peace and blessings, ladies and gentlemen. Peace and blessings. All praises to the Most High. On the screen to the right, you see 17-year-old Carmelo Anthony. And to the left, you see two twin brothers. One of those brothers, and I don't know which one, is Austin Metcalf. You see them holding big military style guns and dressed in fatigues. And pretty sure by now that you have heard about this story. So I'm not going to play any news clips. I'm just going to get right into the commentary. Now, if you have not heard about this story, this happened on April the 2nd in Fresno, Texas, at a high school track meet. Now, there are various different narratives, very different accounts of this story. So I'll just go through a few of them. However, the outcome of this particular incident is 17-year-old Karmelo Anthony, once again, putting him here, was accused of unaliving with a knife this Austin Metcalf, who is also a 17-year-old high school student at a track meet in Frisco, Texas. Now, the narrative goes that Carmelo somehow happened to be under a tent that was reserved for this particular high school's track team. And that high school, I guess Austin Metcalf attended that high school. Now, the story goes that Austin told Carmelo to get out of the tent. Some people even brought the fact up that it was a seat involved. That Austin asked him to get out of the seat, and it was then allegedly that people said that 17-year-old Carmelo Anthony pulled out a bag and reached his hand in his bag and said, "Touch me and see what happened." And then one account said Austin touched him, and then one account said Carmelo said, "Punch me and see what happened." And then they said when Austin Metcalf physically tried to remove him, and that's the wordage they're using. When Austin Metcalf physically tried to remove young Carmelo, that is when he pulled out the knife, and as we say, he went to jigging, I guess. And I think he jigged him one time in the chest, and the young man was reported to have passed in his brother's arms. And it was said by the police that Carmelo, the young black brother, ran to, I guess, his other side of the field, or whatever the case may be, and the police identified him as the quote unquote suspect. And it was said to in the articles that he said, "Nah, I'm not a suspect. I did it." And they also claim that he asked officers, "Will I be able to claim self-defense?" And so the lines are drawn in the sand. I see a lot of people talking about this, and I'm just going to talk about it from that perspective. Now, of course, the father of Metcalf came out and said, well, it's not a race issue, it's not a political issue. But anytime we have this situation whether it is black taking the life of a white, or white taking the life of a black, there's going to be this conversation and the narrative. And a couple of stories that I read, once again, paint that narrative from like People or New York Times. They paint Carmelo as the K-iller and, this violent attacker And they said, well, he just pulled out the knife haphazardly and just went to jigging my man for no reason. That's how they're painting some of the narratives of the story. And one New York Times story, because currently Karmelo had a fundraiser. Now I just looked for that GoFundMe account, and it said that GoFundMe account is no longer available. So I don't know, because there were reports that he and his family has raised $160,000 for his defense. I just saw an article about that, but when I tried to pull up the particular GoFundMe, I don't know if it was a fake or dummy GoFundMe that was trying to, cash in off of it, but I could not find it. So I don't know if that GoFundMe is still up. But also the Austin Metcalf family, they have a GoFundMe as well, and their GoFundMe has raised over $250,000. And so once again, we have two different sides saying, two different things. Many people feel, as was mentioned on this GoFundMe account, that a lot of people are saying Austin Metcalf and his brothers were known bullies. They were known bullies, and one article I read said that they were attempting to take, Carmelo Anthony's phone in his bag. Once again, we have two different narratives. Now, if he was under the tent where Austin and his friends were, but of course, they're going to paint the narrative. I can doubt that situation went as they are painting it. Like the one guy said, touch me, and he touched him. And, he said, just, touch me. When the guy asked him to leave, he just said, well, touch me and see what happened. I doubt that interaction went like that. I've been 17 years old, and I've never had an interaction that go like that. There was some other words spoken, you can best believe that. But, some of the articles are just, painting Karmelo as this, they're saying, he, the K Iller of, the 17-year-old, unalives a rival high school track star, and they're painting, Austin to be this all-American bred kid, never got in trouble. But, as you see, there are several pictures that are surfacing. I'll show you this of he and his brother, and they're talking about their old pictures. How old can they be? They're only 17. And also this picture as well. That looks like it was yesterday, looking at some of those photos. So, they're trying to paint him as this all-American, victim when, it has been said. And, looking at those photos, those look like some pretty hardened guys. And then, there's several different, once again, people who are chiming in. I heard one conservative say, yeah, it's a known fact that black young men are just inherently violent, or just wildly violent. And it's time for that we address the issue. And then some people bring up, the Kyle Rittenhouse factor, where Rittenhouse, ran, cross state lines with a military gun and, went and, hunted people down because he felt threatened. And so they compare, okay, well, now Carmelo Anthony is being attacked by all intents and purposes. And, he defends himself now. People are painting him as an animal. So that is the different dichotomy or the duality of this situation when, we have seen so much injustice against Black people in this country. When something like this happened and we are not the victim, then of course we are going to probably want to lean towards the side of self-defense, because so many times, and I would say if it was the other way around, there would be no question that, it was self-defense. If it was Austin who took the life of young Karmelo, they would have had Karmelo's Instagram up, with him, throwing signs and, puffing L's and flashing heaters or burners or sticks. They'd have had him with a bandana. They'd have pulled up everything nook and cranny about Carmelo Anthony. And then they would have also painted, Austin to be just a frightened little white kid from suburban America who was, scared of this black gangbanger, And so that is what we have seen in the past too. So now that it's opposite, how are they going to spin the narrative? Once again, we've already tried to see them spin the narrative of, our young brother and paint Austin as, once again, an all-American kid. But, these other photos have surfaces. There's even a photo with him, sticking up the middle finger. Like, so, these parents, these kids, like I've been 17 years old and I was into some stuff that my parents knew nothing about. I did some things that I did away from home that I didn't do at home. And so that's on both sides of the spectrum. Once again, we don't know the history. I don't know the history. Not enough information has come out. But, family members of Karmelo, they were adamant, like, no, these weren't perfect kids. They were two white thugs who bullied people. So, if that is the case, then, the national narrative, just look at some of these titles. Let me show you some of these titles of some of the articles that I saw. Let me share this screen real quick and just look at some of these articles. Look at the top one on the right. How Austin Metcalf accused K. Iller is raking in cash for his legal defense. And then they said it's sick at the end. Fresno track meeting, stabbing suspect to seek reduction in bond, new charge. So there are several different narratives, and you can tell these narratives by the title. Once again, the family of Texas teenager accused of K. Illing track rival has raised more than $80,000. As sick conspiracy theories about victims spread, hate, fear, and division. Okay, now that's New York Times. Justice for Karmelo, FundMe claims Austin Metcalf suspect is a well-mannered man. They call him a suspect there. And there you see, once again, the photos. And so there's several, once again, narratives. And so I'm one to kind of look at things from a historic point of view. We've seen these things unfold time and time again. We've seen the lives of many young black men taken, senselessly by police or even by citizens. So in this case, once again, I handle it like all cases. I'm desensitized to it. I don't feel anything, because of this situation. Let me just say that. And I have to take a break sometimes because I start not feeling anything in a lot of these situations and just looking at it from a, political or police point of view or justice or spiritual point of view. We see these things happening often, and, there's no clear cut solution. Brother asked me for a solution the other day that, and I had a few ideas, but no clear-cut solution. But this case has actually garnered, once again, a lot of attention. There's not a lot of facts. There's, two sides, and then there's the truth. what really happened under that tent, we'll probably never know. But once again, there's two sides to the story where 17-year-olds, two 17-year-olds evidently got into it. If he was being bullied, or once again, as far as stand your ground, if that man put his hands on him, like he was reported to tell police officer, look, man, it was self-defense. He put his hands on him. Some people feel that once you put your hands on somebody, they have every right to defend themselves to the fullest extent that they feel to neutralize the threat. And I think that is stand your ground. So many people feel that the young brother stood his ground. So if also, the young man, Austin Metcalf, kept his hands to himself, then, this situation wouldn't have been, escalating. And where were the coaches, when all this was going on? So there's a lot of moving parts to this, but I will never discount the racial dichotomy or the racial dynamic of this situation, because it's always there. It's always there. And like I mentioned, Kyle Rittenhouse got off, ran through 2 states, something he had nothing to do with, and didn't even have no business possessing a gun. And he was able to use self-defense in the taking of the lives of 2 people. And here's a clear-cut situation. Hey, the young man put his hands on me. I had to defend myself. And he said he asked, the police officer, was the man going to be okay, which shows compassion. So, I just wanted to, give my thoughts on this story. This is a major story. I guess we'll, be covering as developments mature in this case. But, y'all let me know what y'all think in the comments. 919-587-7782. Peace and blessings.